The ethnic cleansing of the surviving Palestinian population of northern Gaza by the Israeli state. All the signs are pointing in that direction in terms of that happening right now. Now, given Israel's escalation of the onslaught against Lebanon, the risk is this will be buried, much like thousands of Palestinians under the rubble of Gaza, many long dead, for months even, yet still classified as missing, excluded from the official death toll. In this context, let me bring up the name of Gior Eiland, a retired Major General of the Israel Defense Force, so-called, and former head of the Israeli National Security Council, who's been serving as an advisor to the Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. Last October, he wrote a column published in Fathom Journal, which is an outlet which is published by BICOM, the British Israel Communications and Research Centre, or the main pro-Israel lobbying group here in Britain. Now, this is quite an extraordinary piece, to say the least. In it, he declared his support for the total siege of Gaza, that itself is illegal under international law. He called for even a dramatic, continuous and strict siege of Gaza. He said, this is what Israel has begun to do. We cut the supply of energy, water and diesel to the strip. All war crimes. He added, in order to make the siege effective, we have to prevent others from giving assistance to Gaza. Israel sent a clear message that even if they want to sell containers with diesel and other energy, we will not let it happen. And if needed, we will bomb those containers. Since he wrote those words, we've seen the biggest mass slaughter of aid workers in recorded history, including the killing of foreign aid workers, such as, for example, above all else, the World Central Kitchen attack back in April. If you look at the evidence there, could only have been calculated. For example, their route was coordinated in advance with the Israeli military. That led to other aid agencies suspending their operations in Gaza, contributing, of course, to the policy of starvation. In the piece, Gior Eiland wrote, people might ask whether we want the people of Gaza to starve. We do not. Therefore, the people of Gaza will have to leave, either temporarily or permanently, via the border with Egypt. When the people have evacuated and the only ones left in Gaza are Hamas, and when food and water has run out, we can also bomb the water facilities in Gaza so there will be no water, then at some point Hamas will either be completely destroyed or surrender or agree to evacuate Gaza, just as Arafat was forced to leave Beirut under an Israeli siege. Any other measure short of this will not be effective. Israel should not allow any economic assistance. The people should be told that they have two choices: to stay and starve, or to leave, to stay and to starve or to leave. If Egypt and other countries prefer that these people will perish in Gaza, that is their choice. I prefer something that is more reasonable. He then goes on to demand the destruction of all the water facilities in Gaza. To be very clear, what he was agitating for here were serious, grave war crimes, murderous mass ethnic cleansing, what would be in practice the mass slaughter of hundreds of thousands of civilians, violently, because obviously huge numbers of people would never agree to leave their homes permanently like that. He justified all this on the grounds of preserving the lives of Israeli soldiers. We can see, of course, elements of what he called for having been executed, implemented by the Israeli state. This article was cited in South Africa's case, the International Court of Justice, which alleged genocide against Israel, in the section outlining intent. Now, fast forward, 22nd of September this year, CNN's headline was Netanyahu considering plan to force all Palestinian civilians out of northern Gaza to besiege Hamas. It noted how it wasn't clear how many Palestinian civilians remain, but estimates run into hundreds of thousands. It added the plan does not mention whether, when or how civilians would be allowed to return to northern Gaza. After nearly a year of war with no part of Gaza immune from Israeli airstrikes, Palestinians have been increasingly unwilling to heed Israeli demands to relocate. Well, relocate. We're talking about ethnic cleansing here. It then notes this plan came from a certain Gior Eiland. In a video he made a few weeks ago, he declared those who leave will receive food and water, but in a week, the entire territory of the northern Gaza will become military territory. And this military territory, as far as we are concerned, no supplies will enter it. To be clear, this is a grave war crime being outlined, a grave war crime. You can't just demand a civilian population just leaves their homes, or the remains of their homes, or wherever they happen to be, under threat of violence and death, indeed regardless of their circumstances, you cannot then declare that anyone who remains as a legitimate military target, which is what's suggested here. A civilian always remains a civilian. Strikingly, the Israeli national broadcaster Kan reported, as CNN notes, that Benjamin Netanyahu, in a closed-door meeting with the Knesset's Foreign Affairs and Defence Committee, Knesset is the Israeli parliament, said the plan makes a lot of sense. Netanyahu was quoted as saying, "It is one of the plans being considered, but there are several others. We are committed to dismantling the civilian control of Hamas." 27 members of the Knesset, including 3 sitting ministers, wrote urging the government to accept the plan. The Guardian similarly reported that Avikahi Bowen, an MP belonging to the ruling Likud party, said the plan was currently being evaluated by the government. Echoing this commitment to a serious war crime, he said, according to the plan, the IDF will evacuate all the civilians who are in the north of Gaza from the border to the Gaza city, and after they will evacuate, the IDF will assume that only the terrorists will remain. When the civilian population is left, you can find and kill all the terrorists without harming the civilians. Again, he must know many civilians will remain, refuse to leave. And international law does not allow you to simply badge those civilians as military targets. So what's happening? What's happening right now? The IDF has ordered the closure of several hospitals in northern Gaza, including the Kamal Adwan. As the project coordinator for the NGO Médecins Sans Frontières says, the latest move to forcefully and violently push thousands of people from northern Gaza to the south is turning the north into a lifeless desert while aggravating the situation in the south. Access to water, healthcare and safety is already almost non-existent, and the thought of more people fitting into this space is impossible to imagine. People have been subjected to endless displacement and relentless bombing for the past 12 months. Enough is enough. This must stop now. Just take a moment here. Imagine a state hostile to the West ordered a hospital in a war zone to be emptied of all its patients. Newborn babies in incubators, pregnant women, the severely wounded, the unconscious, those in ICU. It would lead the news as a hideous crime condemned in the most grave tone imaginable by Western politicians. But with Israel, it's normalised. Let's just see how the injured are being evacuated.
الآن نقل أحد الإصابات وهي لسيدة حاولت الخروج من المخيم، تم إطلاق النار عليها. مشاهد صعبة وقاسية جدا. لا يتوفر أي إسعافات، لا يتوفر أي مركبات.
أن يتجاوزوا هذا الشارع تم إطلاق النيران عليهم.
هذا هو المشهد.
Now, the IDF has encircled Jabalia in northern Gaza, launching ground operations there, justifying that on the grounds Hamas are regrouping. Over a year of this genocidal mayhem, and lo and behold, areas they've already razed from the face of the earth are falling under Hamas control, they're declaring, because Israel is never going to militarily defeat Hamas, which even some of their own security officials realise. You cannot defeat an idea. If you wage a genocidal war against an entire people, then young men in particular are going to take up arms and keep fighting you. It is obvious to anyone with any basic sense. Now, in the midst of this latest onslaught, large numbers are reported killed by Israeli airstrikes on a mosque and a school. Just look at this. Look at this.
الساعة 10 مساء من الساعة 3 عصرا والنار ملتهبة بالأطحين. الدفاع المدني أجانا مرتين، ولكن أجانا مرة بدون مية، وهينا قد ما نقدر محاولين نسيطر على النار وربنا يستر.
That was the only flour warehouse in Jabalia camp, bombed and burned, which can only be understood as a deliberate attempt at starvation. As the author Ahmed Massoud, a brilliant Palestinian writer from Jabalia who have interviewed, tweets, and this is hideous, thousands of people are surrounded by Israeli tanks in Jabalia, including my sister and my nephews and nieces. Israel is shooting anyone who's trying to leave. They've run out of food or water. How can this possibly be allowed to happen? And the worst part is we can all see it. As a Palestinian Christian human rights activist, Ihab Hassan writes, an Israeli airstrike on Al-Yaman Al-Sayed hospital in the Jabalia camp north of the Gaza Strip has resulted in initial reports of 21 people killed. The images and footage coming from there are horrifying. Bodies scattered, charred, torn apart, devastation everywhere. This is the only photo I can share. The destruction is unbearable. Meanwhile, the mass slaughter of journalists continues after Israel has already perpetrated the biggest massacre of journalists in recorded history. Few journalists remain alive in northern Gaza. They've mostly been killed, those who remained. Today, They injured Tamer Labed and the Al Jazeera cameraman Fadi Al-Wahidi, who was shot in the neck, and they killed Mohammed Al-Tanini. All of this being facilitated, armed, backed, made possible by the US state. So it was satisfying to see US State Department propagandist Matthew Miller challenged over this.
This administration has financed a genocide in Gaza for the last year, and every day you're up there denying accountability for it. So, I mean, what gives you the right to lecture other countries on their moral...
So if you have a policy question for me, I'm happy to take it. If you want to give a speech,
No, but
there are plenty of places in Washington where you can give a speech.
Yeah, but people are sick of the bullshit in here. I mean, it is a genocide. You are abetting it, and you are risking nuclear war in Ukraine for this proxy war.
Plenty of other places to give a speech. Go ahead.
It's difficult to know what to say. The worst crimes of our age committed over and over and over again in full public view, live streamed on a daily basis, facilitated by the US administration and other Western governments. Well, we have to keep bearing witness. We have to keep speaking the truth, because this is a grave crime, one of the worst crimes of our age, a deliberately executed crime, and we must not give up the fight for accountability and justice. Please like and subscribe. Do leave your thoughts, your comments. Do help us take on the pro-genocide media as ever at patreon.com/OwenJazz84. Listen to the podcast. I'll speak to you soon.